Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Finding Islam podcast. I'm your host, Abeer, lifestyle editor for Finding Islam. I'm joined by two guests, one familiar, one new. So, firstly, joined with Zain, our analytical editor for Finding Islam. Welcome, Zain. Thanks for joining us again. And special guest, Marwan. So, Marwan, would you like to just give a quick introduction to yourself?
Absolutely. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Marwan. Marwan Al-Akari. I do know my name. I don't know why I started there my name, but I do know my name. My name is Marwan Al-Akari. I am currently in the field of kind of consulting, but also it's kind of like in project management in the area of data analysis, specifically in the field of media. I previously done my master's at SOAS University. I studied international management and economics, focused on the Middle East. And I done my thesis focused specifically on the institutions of change, how especially international institutions, but also national and local institutions drive change, and really looking at different, or in particular, kind of new age economics to understand post Arab Spring, what's really been happening, how it's impacted, the developments as well as where we are right now. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. I think I'll probably go into a bit more detail, inshallah, when I discuss some of the topics.
Inshallah. Yeah, I know it's nice to have you with, your background and everything. It's actually very relevant, I feel, to the discussion we'll be having, inshallah. Plus, I know you got some nice insights onto this kind of area. So what we'll be discussing basically for today, it kind of stems a lot from our last episode where we discussed a lot about capitalism, and particularly the issues of it from an Islamic perspective. Today we'll talk a bit more about it more. We'll tie Islam and Muslims into it as well, but it'll be a little bit more based on kind of the media and kind of how it's used as a way to either, critique or praise things such as capitalism and aspects of our society. And mainly because it's very topical, we'll talk a bit about Squid Game, which I think is a very effective way of doing that. So we'll just jump into it. So first of all, what did you guys think of Squid Game? Personally, I liked it. You think it was good?
I thought it was quite fantastic. I thought it was a great, socioeconomic critique of capitalism in Korea, but obviously that has a lot of relevance outside of Korea. In terms of addressing issues like the class struggle, social mobility, and corruption of elites, and the lack of, the lack of sympathy or empathy that accompanies capitalism, a society, an ideology which values the material.
Absolutely. What about yourself, Marwan?
I personally really enjoyed it. I thought it was, I think a lot of Korean filmography and films and shows, they really have this really nice subtlety when going into social issues. And not only do they have that subtlety, which I think in particular American, North American movies lack, they have this ability to touch on so many different topics through like very, very mind challenging or like very challenging shows. I think we've seen a few films between the three of us that touch on these similar topics within Korean film, and they always do it really well. I think we're going to discuss a couple more of them anyway.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot more to discuss, and I would just like to make it clear that I'm not a sheep. I was already watching Korean films like 10 years ago. So just in case anyone was wondering. I didn't hop on a bandwagon. There's stuff that's better than Squid Game, but it's just popular, so let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's the reality. Now, actually, to be honest, it was you who introduced me to Korean film. Actually, I remember we watched one at your house a couple of years ago. Yeah, so I can back you up on that one. I think with Squid Game, it helps definitely that it's on Netflix. Netflix obviously being the massive platform that it is, boosted kind of, I think, its popularity. Plus, I think what made it special and kind of, I think, a big hit, particularly outside of Korea, was how well it's shot. Like this fantastic direction, amazing design and everything, and just the acting and performances from everyone are fantastic. Like you get a feel for everyone in that show, like why they're participating here, how they got to this point that they're this desperate, for money. And each character is likable and dislikable, as they're intended to be, which is great. Plus, without a doubt, once something kind of gets has that kind of shock value and kind of like some previous shows have had, like Tiger King, Making a Murderer, where it's something people can discuss. It goes everywhere then, and the memes and discussions go over Twitter and Instagram, these things. I think that helps really blow it up. But to bring kind of the discussion back to the show, without a doubt, a very impressive show for how good it is. And I hope we see a season 2. I don't know for certain if we will, but it'll be good to see more of it and kind of what they do there. And to touch a little bit, I suppose actually I would ask the question then, particularly for yourself, Zain, because you've seen some previous examples. So like we I think we all know of the film Parasite, and we've all seen Parasite, another prominent example of a film critiquing Korean society and kind of very harsh capitalist environment there. Are there any other, like some of the other films you've seen, would they be similar in that sense? Like, do you see that kind of social commentary there?
To us, the director of Parasite, even before he blew up with that film, a lot of his films were producing very good social commentary. His name is Bong Joon-ho, and before Parasite, he did Okja and he did Snowpiercer, which are both films about about class and economics, and the struggle of advancing in society or doing well. Snowpiercer, it's a story about people who like live in the only train in existence. All of humanity lives on a train that circles the world, and the people at the back of the train are the have-nots, and the people at the front of the train are the haves. So it's just another great film about this very similar issues. And similarly with this film Okja, that actually goes a lot into capitalism in terms of corporations and their power and influence over ordinary lives. And another great series which people should totally watch is it's Kingdom. It's on Netflix. It's about medieval Korea. And it's about political intrigue and how ordinary people are overtaxed and marginalized and are ruled over these corrupt elites, and also they're zombies. But so there's a lot of these consistent themes that are coming out of Korean cinema, not even just recently, but over the last 10, 20 years, and it probably does have something to do with the lived reality of Korean people in a society which has very much embraced Euro-American capitalism. And although it's not the same as their capitalism, it is at the end of the day based off their fundamental philosophical and economic outlook. So it's
building that. I think not only is it because it's not just obviously the Koreans who have these social issues. It's the same, I think, worldwide, but it's also their love of this kind of free expression of ideas, rather than kind of really limiting your films to have a savior, have that 3-act, being able to really actually enjoy movies that will critique very heavily the society that we live in, not be falling within that same consistent, everything has a happy ending, everything is an opiate, everything, is just trying to get that dopamine running.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic point. And you see that in both Squid Game and Parasite, the ending of Squid Game is not at all a happy ending. The guy wins the money, but he is, what does it cost him? His daughter no longer lives in Korea. His mother is, by the way, sorry for spoilers for anyone watching this who hasn't, watched these shows yet, but we will be spoiling it. his mother's gone. She's died as well before he could get back.
Gone.
He's lost he's lost everything, and you see a year later he hasn't even spent or done anything with his money. He's not living as if he has all this money. So what was the point? What was it worth? And I enjoyed I enjoyed the reveal when he speaks with the old man, and they had that kind of bet to see will someone help the drunken man outside who's going to freeze to death. And in the end someone does, because as sad and depressing as the ending of the show is, there is still a little bit of hope there, like when you see that, which I thought was nice. That is still a positive message. But yeah, no, it's very true that these kind of I'm not as familiar with Korean cinema. My main examples are Parasite and Squid Game, but both had that kind of very melancholy ending that just leaves you thinking, just kind of processing everything you've witnessed. And yeah, just like it's good. I think it's good to have media like that leaves you pondering.
I watched a movie just a couple of weeks before I watched Squid Game. I'm sure you guys have heard of it, called The Platform. It's not a Korean movie. I think it's Spanish. I think once we kind of get out of the North American continent, we begin to see some, across all of Europe, you see some excellent movies that really have the same as all of the same points that we've mentioned about Korean film, in particular European film. And have either of you guys watched The Platform?
No, I haven't.
No.
It's very similar. Like, it has this very surrealist plot where it's like a vertical prison, and there's a platform of food that up down every day. Yeah. And I'm not going to spoil the movie, but I really enjoyed it because it's not that type of movie where the hero ends up like doing what you expect him to do. I'm trying to really not spoil it for you guys. But really representing true reality, but by the way that the ending kind of finishes. Quite difficult to get to my point, having not trying to spoil it, but I think it does have that same element of surrealism, trying to push forward a critique of society. And yeah, no, I think these type of movies, we've all discussed them before. They're definitely our favorite type of movies, just because they don't leave you feeling the way you want them or the way that you're expecting them to make you feel. I do recommend people get away from North American movies.
Just on that point, and I'm really glad you're raising it. Like how how sometimes culture and mass culture can be used as an opiate or a means of distraction. Throwing bread in circuses at people. I think that's a great point, and I don't think that that maybe there is an argument to be made that Euro-American cinema isn't as critical of power structures as it could be. Although there definitely are great films in that vein, but a great example of a failure of this is some of the Marvel stuff that's been coming out recently, which I sort of detest. Yeah. I'm not sure if you saw the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But, it's exploring these issues of race in America and what it means to be, a man of color and to take on the mantle of a white superhero. And it's asking these very important and interesting questions. And then it basically ends in this with a total failure to provide any sort of meaningful challenge to the very power structures that the characters were critiquing. It was just a failure in that way. We're just like, participate in the power structure. So I thought that was great. So I think it's very useful to raise. And I think it also, on the same point, you're watching the platform, you say it was Spanish? Brazilian?
Yeah, it is Spanish, I believe so.
I think one of the reasons that we're actually seeing a massive rise and proliferation of non-Western cinema and culture in recent times. I was actually, obviously, you guys will know this. I work in a cultural relations organization. So I do a lot of the, I get involved in a lot of these very interesting conversations. And this week we were in the strategy session, and the head of strategy was saying, that that like that the primacy, the supremacy of British and American culture is actually being challenged by. He specifically mentioned Ertugrul in Turkey, like Turkish dramas. He mentioned Squid Game. He's it's like people in cultural organizations actually, they can see that there's a reason for these shows to be popular, and he specifically said like they're addressing what audiences want to see. Like there are people around the world who relate to these Turkish dramas, to things like Ertugrul. It reflects their values and their ideas, and same for some things like Squid Game. People have problems with capitalism and are economically marginalized, and these shows are addressing issues. So that it's a great point you're making, Marwan, about how but cinema from outside of North America has its value being more, I suppose, appreciated.
Yeah, it's great to see as well, because I think, the majority of people that are from, the Western world, like the US and Europe, they wouldn't be as familiar with other film industries. Like we've seen Bollywood become massive in terms of numbers, but that's mainly because it's still obviously massive in India, but also they've become very, very popular in China, and of course with diaspora, South Asians around the world. But I wouldn't say they've penetrated like the Western kind of film industry the same way now. Kind of we've seen with the likes of Squid Game, Parasite. Parasite winning Best Picture and also Best Director at the Academy Awards, very significant. It is a massive achievement, and it's been building for a long time. Like you said, Zain, these aren't outliers of Korean cinema. They have a strong standard now when it comes to filmmaking and TV shows in general, and we are seeing that more. And I'm glad you mentioned Marvel. I had a feeling you would, because I know we discussed Black Panther quite a bit, when it came out, and for me, my expectation with any Marvel movie or TV show, it's always that I'll be entertained and that's about it. And the one film I suppose I was hoping would be a bit deeper is Black Panther. And you watch it and it always felt like they're getting there and then they just don't go the extra step. Like, the whole concept of Wakanda doing nothing for other African nations, doing nothing for African Americans and so on, when they fully are capable of supporting them, for their fear of kind of being exploited. That itself is a critique right there of the nation state, and how the nation state will only focus on its own national interests before anything else. And even Killmonger as a villain, and his father, who had good intentions, but of course with Killmonger they just made him bloodthirsty and kind of someone without an actual plan. Great ideology, but without an actual plan other than just revenge and violence. Which was such a shame, to be honest, because it could have been fantastic. It could have been that kind of social commentary we've never seen in a mainstream Western film before, other than, the likes of like Fight Club and stuff like that,
Yeah.
I'll take it even.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was saying, you do see these outlier films like Fight Club, from David Fincher. Actually, he does his work has some great critiques, and the like Fight Club or The Matrix or The Truman Show. These are all great films which critique modern office life, capitalist life. So you just see these outliers, but unfortunately, like the $1 billion films are these opiate films, I think, as Marwan was describing them. So it is a shame. And even to us, you might argue, and you might say this as a critique of the Korean films as well, and of any of these good films like Black Club that are coming out of America. You might argue that that's just capitalism's way of commercializing critique, commercializing dissent. So even as much as we like to praise Squid Game or Fight Club or Matrix, any of these great critiques that are coming out of modern society that we need, that are important. These are important critiques, but they are just a way of, you know what I mean?
I get what you're saying, and you see that trend particularly in Britain. There's so many TV shows that are about people on benefits. There's literally shows about people like repo men repossessing people's houses and belongings. Shows about enforcers removing people that can't pay rent anymore, and it's like, these are all designed to just basically make you dislike poor people. That's what it feels like. Like these people, you don't really care about why they're in that circumstance. You're just like, oh, they can't. They're probably just lazy, or they're on drugs or whatever, and they're in this situation all through their own fault. When that is not often actually the case, and some very unfortunate circumstances that lead them into that position. But you don't care about the individual, and it's very much a commercialization, I feel, of basically just the wealth divide and just kind of the class system that is still very prevalent in the UK. So I think it's a very valid point. And kind of one thing as well I'd extend on that, with Korea, one concern I'd have is as they become more popular outside of, their media becomes more popular outside of Korea, they will follow the same norms and trends that you see in these, popular commercial mainstream films like the Marvel films and so on. Because you have seen that with like Korean pop music, for example. It's very sanitized, very commercial, designed to just be max appeal. And like I've been fascinated by it for a long time, and yeah, it's like a factory. Just what will generate the biggest popularity outside? How can we appeal to everyone?
Yeah, I think, especially you mentioned, I think, in K-pop and K-dramas, and which is like really the other side of Korean culture, and even one that I think they do try to critique to a certain extent in Squid Games, where I remember watching a documentary about how K-pop stars would be crammed into this house, put under really strict regimens. They have to like
surgeries,
sell pretty much all of their rights. They have to have 5% body fat at all times. They can get fired at any time. They're completely like commercial.
It's like modern slavery in K-pop.
Yeah, it's horrendous, and it starts when you're a kid. They literally have like these. I would call them factories because that's what they are. They're like basically designed to at 10 or whatever age it is when you're a young child. Do they see you as someone who can potentially not only be a singer or a dancer or whatever, but can be a commercial image? Because like the reality is with the music industry in general, it's a product that they're selling. You're not an individual, you're a product, and you definitely see that taken to the extreme with Korean pop music. And yeah, it's horrendous the treatment they get. Like there's so many stories, and they can't say anything. I remember there was one Korean pop star who he said something that was taken as being controversial. Like I can't remember exactly what it was now, but it was it was taken basically as bad mouthing Korean society or something, and he was no longer part of that group. He got kicked out. But yeah,
you can't be critical in any way. You can't be controversial. You can't have any thought that might make the commercial machine lose a penny here or there. Yep. I'll even take it further. I think touching on both these points, the points of like creating these like commercial machines, and also the previous points of opiates and film and movies being like really capitalistic opiates, for the masses. I'm going to go into my current job. I'm not going to mention anything specific, but I really want to talk about like the technology or like kind of the infrastructure that's currently being built, and that's been built in the United States for nearly 100 years now. So my company, or the one that I work for, they're first and foremost a media measurement company. They have this thing called TAM, Total Audience Measurement, which is thousands of people across the US, across the UK, across quite a few really large markets. And I'm going to go into the project that I'm working on as well. They have these devices in their homes, literally analyzing every moment of TV consumption and behavior. Not only TV, but all media consumption and behavior. Then we also have on the other side of it, which is the really powerful side of it, the analysis, which is, okay, you have this minute by minute, understanding of how people are thousands of people, how they're consuming media, what movies they're watching, when they switch off, when they don't switch off. At the other side of it, you have social, analysis of these people, social psychographic analysis. Who are these people? Why are they watching this? Why are they not watching this at this time? even in terms of the social change that's happening over a period of time. Okay, for example, I think you mentioned Falcon and the Winter Soldier. In Falcon and the Winter Soldier, it's not just that they're not only a part of the mechanism, the structures of power, they're actually moving the structures of power forward. Because we know through the latest data from this total audience measurement, as well as from our current analysis from all of that data and the psychographic and social data that we add to it, that people react better to this story or that story or this idea, and you can drive literal social change through these infrastructures. So media is becoming a part or an infrastructure of institutional economics. Like it's literally shifting society in a specific direction. When you're looking at K-pop stars and like the whole Korean kind of pop culture movement, it's not just about commercializing it. To a large extent, especially when governments get involved and like big private entities and public entities that have a sort of kind of cultural agenda to push forward, you actually have social change machines being created here. And these movies, shows can be a part of it. So currently within the Middle East, we're introducing this technology as well, which is kind of scary because especially if governments are the ones who introduce this kind of total analysis of society, they have the power to shift programming, shift TV, shift movies, shows in specific directions, whether it's in good ways or in bad ways. Like, for example, you see something like Ortogol. If you have Ortogol and you have deep analysis behind it as well, knowing exactly, okay, this episode done really well. Why did it do well? Creating the right focus groups, going into, even like everything from look and feel to the characters, to the actors, doing a full measurement of every aspect of it. You can literally like create the perfect model of an episode and just push it forward and push the right ideas that you want forward with it and just shift society slowly. It's quite fascinating, but this is the structures that have been instituted a long time ago in the United States, in the UK, and have been used, to shift ideas, shift political ideas, and they're currently being introduced into the developing world to a certain extent. And I think we see it probably in Korea as well, in the public culture that we spoke about. And it's the way that you make the best money. Like that's how you commercialize better than ever. Like when you have an understanding of every aspect of what people want, what every specific person wants, then you can push the right, for example, advertisements at the right time. You can push the right content in the right way, to get the maximum audience, while also pushing change in the way that you want it.
Would you say that this institution of media, like, or the institutionalization of media across countries, would you say is that a means of not only influencing the opinion and socio-cultural trends in their own countries, but would you even argue that it's perhaps a way of extending their soft power internationally, which is
100%.
You would say so because there have been a lot of analyses about how Squid Game and a lot of Korea's cultural output is increasing its soft power output, and it's
not only
yeah.
Like I can 100% confirm that, because I know that, like, for example, if we're looking at Egypt, the companies that are doing the most research and doing the most influence in media in Egypt are not Egyptian companies. They're companies which are external to Egypt that have, this, they do want to challenge or to change culture there, or to, like, I remember one of the researches that we were involved in was looking at the perceptions of a certain country. I won't mention a country, but looking at the certain perceptions of a country across the rest of the Gulf, and analyzing, okay, not only, okay, these people, this is their perception. These people, this is their perception. Why is it that, they think in this way? What would make them change their opinion about this country? What, for example, if it's something to do with tourism or something to do with media, what type of media do we need to be pushing forward to improve our perception of our country externally? This is, it's even more important than changing perceptions of people internally, especially when like your biggest form of economic input outside of renewable resources is tourism. And it's bringing people into the country and
so you see, I think that's like everything you've just said is it leads us to a very good position to carry this conversation forward, because we've talked about now about how we're seeing the tangible effects of Korea's cultural efforts across the world with the proliferation of its culture. It's you could argue that it means not only is it like on one end it has its own value as cultural output, and then on the other hand, and that's why we enjoy it. But on the other end, it has its value as a means of extending Korean influence, and we see, and people see it as a challenger to the traditional Euro-American cultural hegemony in the world, and that's why people talk about Turkey and Ertugrul as well. How they're using their media institutions to attract and influence internationally. People's hearts have been changed by shows like Ertugrul, and I think where this all leads us is just, I suppose, first to consider how important it is for Muslims and for Muslim countries to understand the effects of cultural consumption and media, and for them to try and make use of them themselves in the same vein as countries like Turkey and Korea, traditional countries which aren't traditionally cultural hegemons, which are flexing their muscles a bit, and it's good for it's something that would be very beneficial for Muslims, for them to be consuming media and culture that corresponds to their values, that even reinforces them, and that perhaps encourages integration between Muslims. It's good that people in Pakistan love Urdu and Turkish dramas. It brings their hearts closer, and it's a show with Islamic values. You might even argue. I haven't seen too much of it, but so it's like these media institutions. I suppose all the points you were just making it really, we see that it can be something that's quite harmful, and it can be something that's quite sort of malevolent in its intention, or it could be an opportunity. And it should be an opportunity, I think, for Muslims.
I personally, within the specific projects that I work on, my clients, I don't think I'm doing anything harmful. If anything, I think I'm trying to add on to what you just said and trying to benefit institutions that I'm fond of. But I think really, I fully agree with what you said. I remember reading somewhere about how the Cold War was not won through weapons. It was not won through diplomacy. It was won through cinema, through American cinema, through American, cinema being able to perpetrate this idea, which was a false idea. You think of the 1960s America, a country rife with, racial and political tension, a country that has so many social issues. Being able to yeah, absolutely. To be able to convince the rest of the world that, their culture, their ideas, what they're putting forward to the world is better than, this behemoth. And then I remember the same, I can maybe kind of look for that author afterwards, but they also then looked at Russia. And then a lot of Russian film, Russian cinema, Russian art was very high culture. It was focused on orchestras.
Yeah.
Exactly, on theaters. It was for a very specific class, which is obviously
it didn't have mass appeal. Yeah,
it didn't.
American cultural output was mass appeal, and it was so it had a completely different intention, and also obviously they really advantaged from the fact that British colonialism means that everyone speaks English.
It was no coincidence that for every American film, action film or whatever, the villain was always Russian for the longest time. And even today, the image of the US in the past, I think most people have a pretty, especially elderly people, they have such a positive view on it. like elderly Americans. And Trump, Trump played a lot of, took advantage of this as well. His campaign always talking about make America great, again, and kind of talking about the past and all this kind of stuff. That kind of dialogue.
All of these ideas were created in American focus groups. This is the American media institution at full force. I think one movie that really portrayed this really well was the movie Vice. I don't know if you guys saw it.
Yeah. You recommended it to me.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic movie. I really enjoyed it. It looks at Dick Cheney's life. And there was that one scene where Dick Cheney and his cronies, they were actually quite important in the creation of Fox News in particular. And during their creation of Fox News, they were like putting into focus groups every single terminology that was going to be put forward to change the perceptions of not only the whole country but also the whole world about the war on terror. Like the word war on terror came out of a focus group. The idea that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, these came out of focus groups. It's like really showing how media can be this institution, that protects politics, protects structures of power.
It's something that Hitler understood the power of this. Like he had this whole propaganda machine.
Goebbels was the grandfather of all of this.
Yeah, exactly. And even Kim Jong Il, his political career started from being like the head of media or whatever his exact title was, I forget, but he literally he kidnapped prolific South Korean actors and dictators and actors and directors and so on as well, to kind of boost and focus on North Korean cinema. So without a doubt, it's been a powerful thing and known as a powerful thing for a long time. But it's definitely concerning kind of seeing how targeted it is and kind of how everything that is presented to us, it's presented as if this is what it is, but it's all presented as truth, but it's all been written and directed in a way to get to be as effective as possible in the intent of their message.
I suppose we've just done like a 180 from the beginning, because at the beginning we were like, well, Squid Game is great, and now it's like, can we really trust Squid Game?
I think building on that point has been actually, there's a really, I think, especially what happened in 2016 with Cambridge Analytica, with the whole concept of fake news over the last 4 or 5 years, there is a serious skepticism of traditional media at the moment. And this is something where, shows that come in and don't just show you, okay, this person is clearly the good person and this person is clearly the bad person. People actually enjoy that a lot more these days. One of our recent studies, we were looking at, so we segment, one of the things that we do is we segment society to different psychographic, ideological, social groups. And one of the social groups is disillusioned with news and disillusioned with media. And this is a group of people who, they don't believe in what mainstream media is pushing forward, etc. That group has absolutely ballooned since the last 4 or 5 years. It's just been increasing more and more. This group of, for example, I know that this group loves Al Jazeera, even in the West. Why? Because it's just simply something that is very foreign, like in terms, it's not just CNN or BBC or something that's trying to push forward the mainstream ideas that everyone's agreeing to. And also, it's seen as this this troublemaker in the East somewhere that's trying to challenge ideas, that's trying to bring forward new concepts. And so I think it's not just that we're like, oh, can we trust or mistrust or not trust Squid Games? It's people are becoming a lot more trusting of this type of media, of like skeptical media per se.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And things like even COVID-19, I think, accelerated that even more. The amount of misinformation, the amount of kind of misreporting that you see, and it happens, people have learned nothing. Like, it still happens. Even like Dave Chappelle's new special is a perfect example of that. Most of the criticism it receives are from people that don't seem to have understood really what the point was that he was driving home. At least I feel that way anyway. And rather it's just, I mean, it's easier to just be outraged by these things, or just to only see it from your perspective rather than look at it objectively, which is what ends up happening, with all these kind of things that we're seeing. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious. It's a very weird time. It'll be interesting to see how things progress. Like Facebook and Instagram have been in the limelight right now as well, over similar concerns. Of like basically, particularly how they're like targeting younger people, like teenagers and so on. The effect it's having on younger people, and it's just barrel. When you think about being at that age, where you are, typically more impressionable to what you see, and you're just getting barrels of information that, again, it's algorithmically determined to show you what it thinks you want to see and what will kind of get more engagement from you and thus kind of generate them more money. They're not trying to show you what is necessarily true or correct, which is why we've seen Facebook has been particularly very poor at stopping kind of misinformation and this kind of these kind of issues.
Somebody, like I know people who work in, particularly not in Facebook, but in Facebook content review, and this is very like kind of insider information. But I remember one of them showing me, it's not that okay, this is bad, remove this. This is bad. This is misinformation. I remember at one point they were shown a slide where it's literally like, they're trying to push forward, for example, a specific idea of Israel. It's like, if people disagree with this idea, this is something that you can remove. If people are agreeing with this idea of Zionism, or like very broad explanations of anti-Zionism, were just being, labeled as hate speech, while Islamophobia was very open to, exactly. So it's they're not only not challenging misinformation, they're actually, contributing it. Yeah, contributing to it.
That's right.
It's what's profitable. That's the reality. Controversy sells, and as we see, even with TV shows, things like they'll incorporate vulgarity, they'll incorporate things that are shocking to viewers, because they know that that's what gets people talking. That's what gets people viewing. And it comes down to really, Marwan, what you were saying about kind of everything being like a focus group. Everything being like determined by a group of people to, again, just generate the maximum amount of value out of it, essentially.
I suppose that exact point just brings us back to the same thing we were saying earlier, that we need our own media institutions and our own cultural output that appeals to us and among other Muslims, that reflects our values and even just our needs. That we're not like just reliant on these Euro-American organizations or whatever else organizations that don't necessarily have our best interests at heart, that don't carry our narratives and values. So it's just just that absence is just becoming more and more noticeable, I feel, in the last couple of years with the rise of social media and increasing consumption of Euro-American culture in our countries. There's a lesson there.
It's shocking, yeah. We had a discussion today in work about Saudi, and about how Saudi has some of the fastest social change you will ever see anywhere in the world currently.
Yeah.
We do a lot of research on Saudi. They are. It's mind-boggling how much, once the government steps in and really pushes forward, okay, like we're adopting fully American culture, for example, or we're adopting fully consumer culture and capitalistic culture. Strong governments have very, strong ability to sway a huge part of their society, especially when they have 1,000 consultants sitting, somewhere in the Middle East in cozy jobs, showing them, every single mistake they're making and every single right thing they're making, and really showing them the way forward, to push society in the way that they're trying to envision. And it shows you, not only do you need these strong media institutions, as you're talking about, Zain, you need also really strong media support institutions. These organizations that sit next to media organizations and like show them the way. Actually, this is having this influence on society. You need to shift a bit. You need to push this way. You need to push that way.
Yeah. I suppose and that like raises the point. Like the only way you're gonna have like really healthy and interesting cultural output is if you do have that space for it. I think that space is lacking in a lot of Muslim countries. That there isn't a lot of space for creative expression. That's definitely a problem. Turkey is probably it's fair to say it's a step up a lot of the other Arab countries. So that probably explains their advantage.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, even like 3 years ago, there was some excellent media coming out of Tunisia. During the revolutions, there was some incredible film coming out of a lot of the Middle East, out of Syria, out of Egypt. But when you have these governments that are very interested in pushing society in a very specific direction, they can kind of take over the whole room and be the only form of expression and stop, the people within the country. Of course, not all forms of full expression are, of course, some of it needs to be challenged, some of it needs to be disagreed with. But at the same time, when the only person putting forward ideas is a centralized government that doesn't really care about the people, that is neo-colonial, that, the most important thing to them is, continuing the structures of power that have been put forward by colonial forces hundreds of years ago. And at that point, that's where you really need to critique these structures.
Absolutely. I think that's a good area to wrap it up on. Much a really interesting discussion. We covered a lot, I think, in this topic. I mean, it is such
an hour.
Yeah, almost an hour. Yeah, it is a big topic. There's so many different interesting facets to it. Inshallah, we'll discuss it, further at some point again. But so Jazakallah khair, both of you guys for joining me on this podcast. Is great to have you both. Inshallah, we'll continue to have more podcast episodes. It'd be great to have you both of you back again for them, inshallah. And from all of us from Finding Islam, hopefully you enjoyed listening to this or watching this. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum.